Great. Hello. It's great to be here. I had to look at those yellow, what are they, blankets? Scarves? Because I wanted to make sure it wasn't a terrible towel for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know if we have any Steeler fans here. I don't want to offend you, but okay. So you have my bio. I won't waste any of our time with that other than to say that I'm a product of District 11 school. I grew up here. Will Rogers. Emerson is now something else. Swigert, that's right. Mitchell. And so that's part of the beginning of my journey. I was asked to talk a little bit about mental illness, depression, PTSD, some of those kinds of things. And so I said, sure. I will hopefully have some things for you to be able to take with you when you leave. Want to make sure, am I in the right spot? I'm not moving too far? Okay. Now I hear that I might be able to push this button. Let's see if this thing works. Oh, look at that. It's already gone. Okay.
What's the one
on the far, yeah. Not the one that I thought was the pointer. I just wanted to see that, the little laser pointer. So, we live in a time that is filled with stress. That's filled with busyness, that's filled with constant demands of time and energy, and you all have carved out time tonight to be here for you, for your family, and I respect that. I also know how difficult it is to carve out that time. I've got two children that are, 27 and 25. So, and it's a lot of work and a joy. So we're going to talk a little bit about this, but I want you to understand first that I come from it at a little different angle. I will explain some of that. I also want to just say that I never knew that stressed, spelled backwards, is desserts. So I hope you have a bunch of the desserts so that you're not feeling stressed. I don't know if that's an accurate connection or not. So as you saw in the bio, I run a nonprofit called TwoCore for about 36 years, going on 37, working with young men and young women from youth corrections, probation, foster care, and I really wanted to spend more time with them during the day and what do they do in the daytime, and it ended up being more around treatment and around vocational training. So here's my bias. Bias is that there are professionals who know a lot. I'm an LCSW, I trained, I know some. So do doctors, therapists, but they don't have all the answers. And I love Parent Challenge because I love that it gives the power and the decision making up to you, regardless of where you live. And in the same way, you are your children's, you know your children better than anyone else. Now, I also know that there is a need at times for treatment, but I want to talk a little bit more tonight about why I think that the best approach is a little bit more of a natural approach and not giving a lot of power to a professional outside of your home. I also want to keep that balanced because there are certain kinds of mental illness that what I'm going to talk about, it's probably not going to help. So there's a wide range when we talk about mental illness. There's a wide range when we talk about stress. When we live in a county with such a high suicide rate, when we live in the 4th Judicial District, that there are more kids directly filed on as an adult in this community than in any other community in the state, that there's a lot going on here. So, most behavioral, mental, and emotional disorders are rooted in trauma or toxic stress. That's where I want to kind of start. Oops. Adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation. We're going to talk about adverse childhood experiences. This is not, I debated on how to make sure I talk about this, because this is not about blame. It's not about pointing at fingers and saying, parents, you did this, you didn't do that, that's a problem. What it's about is to understand the impact that the environment has on a young person's development. I couldn't quite get the right picture on here, but I wanted to have the picture of myself as an infant with straps on my legs, because I wasn't quite Forrest Gump. I never got to run fast like Forrest Gump or play for Alabama, for those of you who've seen the movie. But I had some physical difficulties on my legs that forced me to I never learned to really walk as a toddler. I crawled and could only use my hands. I couldn't use my legs. That had an impact on a part of the brain called the cerebellovermis, which has an impact on proprioception and vestibular. That just basically means an impact on movement and balance, which then is one of the places where without a lot of movement and balance stimulation, depression is easy to come by. Really fascinating. So the connection I want to make tonight is the connection between the environment impacting the neuroscience, impacting our brain, which then impacts mental illness. Has anybody heard of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs? Okay, we got a couple of hands up there. Good. I don't want to turn this into too much focus on that, but I do think it has some value for us as parents. The value is that memories are connected not just in our minds but in our bodies. Okay? And that there's an impact on our brain. There are 3 main parts of the brain that we'll talk about tonight that are impacted without it being, oh my gosh, a human anatomy kind of class. Who's heard of the limbic system? Right? Good, the fight, flight, freeze. We're going to talk some about that. Cerebellovermis is the lower part of the brain that is the main producer of dopamine. Who's heard of dopamine? Wow, okay. So it's the feel-good hormone, right? So for me, with part of my struggle with depression has to do with the fact that there was an underdeveloped or a lower baseline of dopamine being secreted in my head and in my body because of the lack of movement that I could do as a child. That's not an excuse, that's just part of how it worked for me.
Attention wide members, yes, Katori Boyd, please come to the front desk. Again, Katori Boyd, come to the front desk. Thank you.
So up here, if you can see it, there are elements of adverse childhood experiences. These are not all of them. These are just some things that in the ACE study that was done in the late 1990s, two scientists were doing separate research projects and got together at a conference and found out there was a lot of overlap in what they were looking at. So what they did was that they did a test or an inventory questionnaire of 17,000 people in San Diego County for the Kaiser Permanente group insurance. They asked 10 questions about childhood experiences, and then they asked about adult well-being. These were the 10. Were you physically abused as a child? Were you emotionally abused as a child? Were you sexually abused as a child? Physical, emotional neglect? Was there mental illness in your family? Did you have a relative that was incarcerated? Was the mother treated violently? Left side in order for basic academic abilities to show forth. So for example, those banners, capital A, small a, capital B, small b, for a child to start in kindergarten, first grade, to look at that, bring it in, have it go through the right hemisphere of the brain, which is the emotions, how's that student feeling, to then tell the left side of the brain, oh, that's a capital B, and I need to write the capital B. And I have to have fine motor skills, right? Holding a pen or a pencil or a crayon or a marker, even unless it's all pushing the button on the doggone iPad or whatever. But so the point is that this process is very complicated. And when a young person is in a situation where there is a lot of stress, a lot of sensory stimulation, loud noises, screaming that feels threatening, they're cold, they're hot. When all that has happened, then cortisol, which is the hormone that says, oh my gosh, we better get ready to run, it clogs up in the middle of the two hemispheres. It slows down the process. And so it makes it harder for kids to learn. The amygdala, that's the fight, flight, or freeze. We're going to talk some more about that. And the cerebellum vermis, see that way down there? That's the part that I'd mentioned earlier. It's kind of the mini brain. That's where they think mental illness and addiction begins. There's more research that needs to happen. But that is the part of the brain that says, when your dopamine level is low, because you're not moving, you're not having opportunities for, for the feel-good emotion, then that has a negative impact on the child. And so think about this. If the baseline of the feel-good emotions way down here, the first time somebody gets a hit from marijuana, starts drinking, they feel extremely strong. They feel a ton better. And boom, that's where addiction starts, based on the neuroscience. So, Bear comes into the Southeast YMCA. We hear screaming, we hear roars. Depending on what the bear's been rolling in, we might smell something. We just don't know, but all of a sudden, it tells us, this isn't good. We shouldn't have bears in the Southeast YMCA. Hormones get secreted, adrenaline, cortisol, ready to go, and then you move. You fight or flight. But I want to tell you there's 5 ways. It's not just fight or flight. let's be clear that fight is because you have to hurt or you're hurt. You get hurt if you don't hurt. That's what fight means. Flight is you need to hide or you're going to be hurt. Freeze. That's another part of the limbic system. Freeze is the part that says you're caught, you're busted, you're going to be hurt. This is the part we'll call disassociation, when they just kind of check out of their body so that they don't feel. Fool. I just read the brain and the central nervous system's job is to make sure that we're all safe. Your brain and your central nervous system and my brain and my central nervous system have sensors in our skin, and then the senses, right? What we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we touch, and then the proprioception and vestibular, the balance and your big movement, posture, those kinds of things. Now, again, right now all of you are taking in what's going on. Maybe you've been sitting too much today and you're a little tired. Maybe your behind's a little sore from sitting too much. Maybe you're stiff, but you're seeing, you're hearing, you're feeling, and your body does this all the time, or your brain's doing this all the time to make sure that you're okay. So let's see what happens. Is there anyone here who can read this? I was hoping that. Now, let me just say, and I told Deborah that I couldn't promise that I would have all the same slides that I did when I sent her the PowerPoint. So this one and the next one are not there, I know that, because I did some more thinking about tonight. It probably feels like we are talking another language. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but just understand that it is, there's so much new information coming, and it's an opportunity for us to learn. So what is this? Corpus callosum, that's the part of the brain, that's the two sides, the hemispheres, where the right side brain has to talk to the left side in order for basic academic abilities to show forth. So for example, those banners, capital A, small a, capital B, small b, for a child to start in kindergarten, first grade, to look at that, bring it in, have it go through the right hemisphere of the brain, which is the emotions, how's that student feeling, to then tell the left side of the brain, oh, that's a capital B, and I need to write the capital B. And I have to have fine motor skills, right? Holding a pen or a pencil, or a crayon or a marker, even unless it's all pushing the button on the doggone iPad or whatever. But so the point is that this process is very complicated. And when a young person is in a situation where there is a lot of stress, a lot of sensory stimulation, loud noises, screaming, that feels threatening, they're cold, they're hot. When all that has happened, then cortisol, which is the hormone that says, oh my gosh, we better get ready to run, it clogs up in the middle of the two hemispheres. It slows down the process. And so it makes it harder for kids to learn. The amygdala, that's the fight, flight, or freeze. We're going to talk some more about that. And the cerebellum vermis, see that way down there? That's the part that I'd mentioned earlier. It's kind of the mini brain. That's where they think mental illness and addiction begins. There's more research that needs to happen. But that is the part of the brain that says, When your dopamine level is low because you're not moving, you're not having opportunities for, for the feel-good emotion, then that has a negative impact on the child. And so think about this. If the baseline of the feel-good emotions way down here, the first time somebody gets a hit from marijuana, starts drinking, they feel extremely strong. They feel a ton better. And boom, that's where addiction starts, based on the neuroscience. So, Barrett comes into the Southeast YMCA. We hear screaming, we hear roars. Depending on what the bear's been rolling in, we might smell something. We just don't know. But all of a sudden, it tells us this isn't good. We shouldn't have bears in the Southeast YMCA. Hormones get secreted, adrenaline, cortisol, ready to go, and then you move. You fight or flight. But I want to tell you there's 5 ways. It's not just fight or flight. Let's be clear that fight is because you have to hurt or you're hurt. You get hurt if you don't hurt. That's what fight means. Flight is you need to hide or you're going to be hurt. Freeze. That's another part of the limbic system. Freeze is the part that says you're caught, you're busted, you're going to be hurt. This is the part we'll call disassociation, when they just kind of check out of their body so that they don't feel. Fool. I just read a great book. If you're into that, it's called The 3 Pillars of Transformative Care. And 3 Pillars of Transformative Care, and they brought these 2 up. Fool are usually for kids that are a little older, that they're gonna hide with a mask while they search for the Achilles heel or the inconsistencies of a parent. And then they go after. Maybe none of you ever did that or have experienced that. But that's another way of protecting themselves. Okay? And then the last one is follow. And we know about this. They gain protection through joining a peer group. So often what happens when kids start school, if they don't feel safe, if they can't compete, there's a guy, an old guy in doing developmental psychology, Erik Erikson, Stages of Development. You may have heard that, but in elementary school, it's industry versus inferiority. That's a part of the developmental stages. So young people come into elementary school and they either have to show and perform a certain way as part of their identity, or they feel inferior in comparison to the other students. And so oftentimes when there's a lot of stress in the home, the young person brings that stress. They don't succeed in school as well because of the stress, because of the impact on their brain. And then what happens? Well, maybe they're the funny person. Maybe they're the person whose identity begins to be forged by talking out of turn, by saying things to teachers, by showing themselves a little bit different and succeeding differently. And so then those are the folks that join together as they get into 4th, 5th, 6th grade. But it's not just about the brain, it's about the whole body. We now know When we're afraid, not now like it's new, our heart beats faster. We're scared. Blood pressure rises. High cholesterol can come on, a heart attack. Because for those of you who have been in situations, particularly a military experience, your adrenaline is supposed to be going so that you're focused, you're ready to move, you're ready to protect. But typically, the human body is only supposed to do that for 20 minutes. Imagine coming from when you are out, not just downrange, but in a threatening situation, or you grow up in a community that's threatening, or where villages get attacked. The adrenaline and the cortisol come, and then it stays. It's a lot harder for it to dissipate, to get down and get out of the body. And so that ends up messing with all sorts of parts of the body. So the importance of understanding stress hormones is to understand that it's all connected, and there are things that we can do, though. I don't know if you can see this. I don't think this was on there either. But so this is what the Dr. Rob Anda from the Center for Disease Control and Dr. Vincent Folletti from Medical Director of Kaiser Permanente, they came up with. They started with adverse childhood experiences. That was in 1998. They knew this was an issue, and they knew about the adoption of health risk behaviors. What they didn't know was the change in the brain structure. And that's what the technology has shown. And then as we learn more and more, all of a sudden, it's not just about the environment that a young person grew up in right then and there that causes struggles developmentally. And again, this has nothing to do with IQ. This has to do with stress hormones slowing the process of performing academically. Social conditions, local context, unsafe situations, and generational embodiment, historical trauma. There's a word called epigenetics that talks about how trauma is passed from generation to generation. So those of you who have experienced racism, the sexism, that there is now proof to see on the DNA chain of how this gets transferred from generation to generation. Now, I got to go to the next slide because it just feels heavy. ACEs are not destiny. Having a high ACE score, having experiences of significant toxic stress does not automatically mean that there's going to be mental illness. Doesn't automatically mean that it's hopeless. Because we now know how predictable some of this is, so then it becomes preventable. And it becomes preventable by caregivers being aware of the possible harm that can be done neurologically. So this was a long way of getting to PTSD. Was one of the things that I was asked to look at, and also to what's the difference. So this is not from the DSM. Not from a book of psychiatrists and psychologists. PTSD, and it's out of order. Am I really messing with you? I'm so sorry. I told Deborah, it's like, I can't promise, and I want to move things around. I think this was in there. It's just like 6 pages later, sorry. So, PTSD is often tied to incidents or experiences. Again, a military experience, a sexual assault, right? It's the powerlessness to feel safe, and it's associated with all the sensory stimulation, and so that attaches. So sometimes the smell of something, sometimes whether it's an aftershave or alcohol in the breath or sounds, the classic Vietnam vet experience of hearing the helicopter, okay, brings back and triggers the sense that they experienced there, that you may have experienced there. And it confuses. It's like, well, I'm not there, but I'm there, right? So there's a re-experience of the intrusive thoughts. And I was really feeling for last week the fire in, it was over New Year's in Germany that was caused by the candle lights that fly up when you celebrate New Year's Eve. Did anyone read that or hear about that? Oh, it's just horrible, isn't it? That these candles that were flying, they landed in the zoo and started the zoo on fire, and a large number of animals were killed. And I'm just thinking, being in a cage, no matter how beautiful it is, like Cheyenne Mountain Zoo, you can't get out and there's a fire. You can bet that those animals, because they're mammals just like you and I are, they disassociated at the very end. Their brain is protecting them from the pain that was going to come, and they died. PTSD versus trauma/toxic stress/complex stress. Maybe the best way to understand it is that it has more to do with relational lack of safety. It has more to do with it being ongoing, repetition. Okay? Noise, remember sensory stimulation. What you hear, what you feel, what you sense. And it disturbs, it challenges the normal brain development. And so I spoke with Manitou Springs Elementary School teachers on Tuesday morning, and so I used a couple of those slides, and the most important thing for you to kind of get to, I think here, maybe not the most important, but to understand that when there's been a lot of developmental trauma, a lot of experiences that have been received as unsafe, and all the hormones are going and it's impacting the brain, that the outcome of that down the road, when they're in school, is that that some of the students don't develop the ability. Am I in the way of you all? Is my bald head break? I saw you lower your cap, and I thought maybe I was blinding you by the light. Is that they struggle with regulating their emotions. They struggle with regulating emotions. And so once a young person is in school and they're struggling regulating their emotions, that's when all the systems start to get involved, right? not paying attention, they're getting up, they must be ADHD if it's a boy. A lot is behind the difficulty self-regulating. The difficulty still is not about blame, it's about information and how we can make some changes. Okay? So a key indicator that a behavior is linked to trauma versus normal stress or frustration is the instantaneous reaction that's out of proportion. Okay? It's out of proportion. And it shows that the young person is not able to transition from one place to another, one subject to another, one hall go into one hallway to another. Somehow that's connected to stress. So, does that student need mental health therapy? And I would say more often than not, no. Again, remember my bias. The bias is, well, what's behind the behaviors? Now, I'm not talking about psychotic mental illness. I'm not talking about folks that have lived on the streets for 40 years and kind of walk around downtown waving their arms in their own struggle with their pain. I'm talking about our children who begin to kind of, well, here's what happens. Our young people adapt to situations really well. But sometimes when those adaptive processes collide with social norms, particularly in a school setting, that's when there's disruption. Okay, that's why, I ran a foster home agency, as a part of my career, and every September and October the calls would just go up because the school system sees the kids, and this is not blaming the school system. That was just a natural response when kids were out of control. Okay, so do they need mental health therapy? I say no, more often than not, because it doesn't get at the neuroscience. So the way in which our brains develop, it's called neurosequential. Meaning that we have the brain stem that first goes, right? That's the part of our brain that says, we have a stomach ache, we got to keep our heart going, we got to blink because there's something coming over here. Okay? Then the next function of our brain is sensory integration. That's the part I was talking about, where the brain's job is to make sure that everybody, bless you, everybody is safe, that we take in all the sensory stimulation. It's then the function is what they say self-regulation. And here's the deal. If a lion is coming down the hallway and we start screaming, we're in more trouble than if we're quiet. So that's a part of the brain says, okay, the next function of our brain is self-regulation. Then it's about relationships. Then it's, what did I do? People were looking at me like, yeah. Then the last part is, oh my, it's technology. And let's not worry about that. The last part is cognition. The last part is thinking. That's the last part of our brains that developed individually. So you and I if we go and need to talk to someone about what's going on in our world, but we had experiences that when we were younger, that there are no words to describe. That there are no ways of saying, let's think about this. Well, if you were hurt pre-verbal, you feel it, you know something's not right, you know you blow your stack, you go from 0 to 100, like that. Let's not just sit and talk about it, because we're not going to access the part of the brain that needs to. That's why I'm not an advocate for cognitive behavioral therapy for teenagers or children younger than that. That you have to get ready. You have to be ready to do treatment. And most teenagers and younger, they're still living out of their limbic system, their emotional brain. Okay? How we doing over here?
We're doing quite well, thank you.
Okay. You know, that's a really pretty slide, too. Thank you for bringing it back. So, let me stop there, get some water, see if anybody has a question, a comment. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes. Thank you.
So what exactly, so I have a 7-year-old, she's gonna be 8 next month, and ever since she was maybe 4 or 5, she's in school, she gets really nervous, but she's a perfectionist, super perfectionist, and she bites her fingers all the way red, down to her super duper far on all of her hands. So, I mean, what exactly, I talked to my husband, what can we do to help her? What is something that you can do, I guess, to get to the, maybe, neuro side of that, to try to, help her to maybe not feel that she does fine in the summer, she doesn't bite on her hands or anything, but as soon as school starts, maybe a month and a half into it, and she does exceptional in school, she does really well in school, but it's just kind of you know.
So she's stressing out,
Yeah.
and what do you do? And part of it is working on her fingernails. Well, I married someone who does that. So let me. That's a great question, because what it shows. Again, that's not an intellectual thing. That's nothing that you can talk her out of doing. She probably doesn't know that she's doing it a lot of times. So, how do you reduce the stress? So that's what we're going to talk about, right? So again, the reason why I like, and if I don't answer your question in the next 3 slides, then throw something at me. When we talk about certain behaviors that could be labeled a mental health issue, it could also be that there is toxic stress, meaning it's just stress that continues to put the stress hormones into the system of the student. And so if for a minute we just say, let's just say that all mental health issues are stress related. And it's not the stress that we kind of have got to in our culture that says, yeah, I'm stressed out, I can't wait for Friday. Right? No. It's a deeper thing than that. And it's in the body. So how do we get some of these stress hormones out? How do we break down the cortisol that's in between the hemispheres of our brain? And what is so exciting about it to me is that it's stuff that we can do in a community setting, we used to do, and frankly, we can't therapize ourselves out of stress. There are not enough therapists, there's not enough money, there's not enough time to turn this into a treatment. There are things that are more natural, that can help. So, the first one is physical treatment. Now, on the one hand, you're going to say, I had to sit here to listen to that. But if you have a kid who has a cell phone or any electronic item in their bedroom, that's a problem. Right? It's not just a problem because, oh my gosh, they might get on there, and I don't want to downplay because I know that, the next one, the sexting and those kind of things. No, the problem is that the energy that comes from there, and I'm not, there's a power, there's the light that influences their ability to sleep. To say nothing of their temptation to be, Instagramming. I don't know, is that a verb? So it's not simple, particularly if your children are already in, I don't know, middle school now? I don't know when they get them anymore. But that is a specific intervention. We know that teenagers don't get enough sleep. We can't just blame it on cell phones. We can blame it on school schedules if we... And I know it's more complex. There's some school folks over there. I know some more complex issue than that, but that's a piece of it. Nutrition, same thing. How much sugar? How much processed food? I was a youth pastor in a suburb of New York City many years ago, and the parents said, don't let Johnny have yellow dye number 5. So what's yellow dye number 5? Well, Mountain Dew, Twinkies. He got yellow dye number 5. I've worked with troubled kids. I've worked with gang kids. I've worked with a variety of pretty difficult kids, and this kid was bouncing off the walls in a way that I hadn't seen. Well, until my son. So, what are we giving? What are our kids eating and putting into their system? Simple allergies. Let's do what's in our control first before we label and have any more psychotropic drugs in their system. Movement. Sitting's the new smoking. Right? So walk, swim, hike, climb, bike, come to the why. Those things make a difference. Movement. When we walk, when we're stressed, can anybody sit on the phone or sit in a chair when they're on the cell phone with an intense conversation? Who can do that? You can? Wow, how do you do that? I'm sorry?
She ignores the other person.
She ignores the other person. Well, so ignoring can reduce your stress level. But the need to walk. We walk. Emotional treatment. I was at an El Pomar Foundation Heritage Series, and they're talking about forest therapy. Anybody heard that? Forest therapy. Now, I like to go to the forest. I don't ski or do any of those kind of things, but being outside and breathing fresh air, movement is a part of healing. Now, what's really nice is the rhythmic moving. In fact, the leading researcher in the neuroscience and how adverse experiences change the brain, he has what he calls 6 R's, and one of them is rhythmic. One's repetitive. Bouncing a ball, drumming with other people, There's a power in that. We do that at Two Court. We want to drum. We're going to do stuff that other people have noticed, and certainly cultures much older than ours have used drumming and ritual and dancing as a way to deal with grief, as a way to deal with joy, celebrations. Arts, using your hands. This is stuff that it's pretty interesting now because therapists are doing this and billing Medicaid. Uh-oh, it did it again. So as soon as I talk about Medicaid, then you could, you know. So who's heard of the term bilateral stimulation? What does that mean? Does someone want to yell that out?
The butterfly, like this.
The butterfly, way to go. So what you're doing is you want to stimulate both sides of the brain. That's what breaks up that cortisol. That's why butterfly. That's why Tai Chi and yoga movement, crossing the midline, is a way for us to reduce the cortisol. Because you know what? 500 years ago, 200 years ago, 150 years ago, do they have therapists? No. Go climb. Go run. Yes. No.
Just a quick question. What are your feelings on brain integration?
Brain integration. Say more about that.
Say what?
Say more about what you. I want to make sure I understand.
The bilateral stimulation of the brain, the exercises to be able to get the integration from the left side to the right side to process the information so that both sides of the brain are working together at the same time.
However they do that, it's good because we were created to have good communication between both sides of the hemisphere. And we need it, right? The one's emotional, and then the other's the more logical. We need both sides. So part of the problem when we have a lot of stress is that it can't get out of the right hemisphere, the emotional hemisphere, and that's what causes a lot of explosiveness in frustrating situations. So I'm all for it.
Have you heard of the brain integration therapy?
I've not heard it described that way. Yeah.
I just had a funny story about the butterfly.
Well,
Anyway,
tell us about the butterfly.
So my kids, I was telling them about it. I have a 5-year-old. Well, I have 5 kids. So my 5-year-old, I was like, oh yeah, it's the butterfly. You put your thumbs together and you do this if you're stressed out because it's like, you know, the bilateral stimulation. And she was like, oh, okay. So I said, so if you're at school and you get stressed out, just sit there and do the butterfly, take a few deep breaths, and then get back to your work. So she told me that she did it at school one day, and then there was one day I was stressed out in the car. She's like, Mom, it's okay, just do the butterfly.
Did you tell her, do you have to keep your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel?
I was like, okay. And then I was like, I'll just do the tapping.
Yeah, just do the tapping.
So I'm like, okay.
Oh, that's great. Well, you know, we can learn a lot from our kids when we can be in the place to receive the lessons that they teach us. In fact, when we talk about the whole therapist thing, that one of the oldest residential treatment centers in the country is in Milwaukee, called St. A's. It was St. Emilian's Lakeside. Thousands and thousands of kids have gone through this. Well, as all this neuroscience information came out, they shut down the residential treatment center because congregate care, meaning you have 5 roommates and there's 40 people living in a space, that's constant stress. They shut it down. They got rid of most of their mental health therapists, and they've hired occupational therapists. Occupational therapists, it's about movement. And that's the way to get the cortisol and the adrenaline levels down. Okay. Social treatment, no isolation. I love this. This is incredible. I'm glad that, and I don't know if relationships get forged here or you're just kind of, in your separate worlds, but you're here. Isolation is critical. Wait, what happened? Okay. I thought for a minute that the slide screwed up. So, being with others, volunteering, anytime you can begin to get your children in situations where they're giving to someone else and they begin to understand that they have a power to help others and not just to receive. Ritual is a part of the community involvement. The rituals, things that we're doing on a regular basis, whether it's a ritual around dinner time, whether it's a ritual around bedtime, but being predictable and consistent is really important. And the more involved your children can be with other adults, the better. In fact, when I was growing up in Colorado Springs, there was only one YMCA. It was the one downtown. It wasn't the new one. It was the ancient one. And that's where we hung out. Everyone went there. We were there all day and into the evening. And if you screwed up at the YMCA, everybody would hold you accountable. I was getting ready to circle up. I was in 6th grade. Going to fight with this guy that we've been playing hard basketball against each other for years. I was tired of him. I didn't like him. He didn't like me. We're circling up thinking that we're bad. And next thing you know, I'm looking up at the ceiling. And it wasn't because he hit me. It was because Mr. Johnson, who was the coach of the most competitive team that we had, grabbed me by the shoulder and threw me down and said, "What the hell are you doing?" Now, I don't know that stuff happens anymore. But golly, if we don't have relatives nearby, if we don't have good neighbors nearby, if we don't have extended family, if we don't have friends and folks from the YMCA or wherever else, then who's going to add to the value of bringing up your children? If you're not involved in a faith community or you're not involved in a neighborhood community, if you're not involved in any of that, then that makes your job tougher because you're on your own. And I would imagine if we could all think back when we were younger, it's a lot easier to get messages received from somebody else than from a parent. All right? If my dad had done that, I'd have run away from home. Okay. Here's a really disturbing statistic. There were 4.93 adults in 1890 that had contact with our kids. That's a lot of adults. That's extended family. That's aunts and uncles and grandparents, and now 2004 down to 2.57, 2.49 in Colorado Springs, and I couldn't find the most recent data, but I saw somewhere that it was below 2. So kids are getting more isolated. Caregivers are more alone in that huge task. And there are less adults around. Now, that's not a judgment. That's not saying that anyone's screwing up. Again, it's saying, oh man, how can we get more help? How can we get more lives? So this is what I teach all my youth counselors at 2Core. Because they want to talk and talk and talk and talk and be wise and help the kids in our program. And really the most important thing is that they need to know, how do the youth feel in their presence? Do they feel welcome, safe, loved, not judged? And I think we do a pretty good job of that. So part of what happens from kind of, we take a step back, not so much a neurological situation, but it has more to do with how do kids feel as they grow up if they've had a variety of kind of negative experiences as they begin to see themselves in a negative light. So since 1983, when I started in the field, every kid I ever worked with had at least one of these. And I'm betting that at least 95% of us have one of these. What do we say about ourselves? What do our kids say about themselves? But see, the connection between how you feel about yourself and how you interact with your child is very strong. I added "I am invisible" about 2 months ago. The other ones I knew. But so many kids just don't feel like anyone sees or hears them. So how can you, as a parent, make sure that your child knows that you hear them, that you see them? When you're tired and you want them just to shut up, right? You want to just put them to bed so that you can crawl to the couch and turn on the TV, which makes perfect sense. It's so hard. That's why we want to have more people involved to help. But when our kids start to say these things about themselves, then that's putting one more layer of burden on their heart, one more layer for you to work through with them. So how do we do that? One of the best lines in any movie of all time. You know, except for I wrote it wrong. It's not The Gift, it's The Help. Who's seen The Help? Way to go. He was kind. He was smart. And you're important. If every student, every kid heard that every morning, instead of "hurry up, get ready, or you're just like your old man." That's what a lot of our boys hear when the dad is gone. What messages are you giving your kids? With your mouth, with your actions. Gosh, that kind of sounded like I was judging, and I'm sorry, that's not my intention. I want to encourage you to think, how are you doing that? Who's heard of the love languages? Oh, look at you all. So do kids have love languages? Yep. Do you know what your kids' love languages are? What's the top one for your kid? I'm sorry? Word of affirmation? And quality time. Good, good. I was trying to be romantic at our my first, it was our third wedding anniversary. I had bought my wife a rose and dipped in that gold that still wasn't that much money, but I thought, let me be romantic. And my wife looked at us like, we can't afford it and it's not practical, take it back. So I took it back, but I heard practical. So she's been cutting bagels like this for the 3 years we were married. So I went and I got her a practical gift, a bagel slicer. It still was too expensive, and so take it back. And I haven't bought my wife a gift since. We've been married 34 years. We don't buy gifts anymore. We don't do Valentine's Day, which is the worst excuse for a holiday. Because gifts from the heart is her 5th of the 5. You know, let's work in the yard together. That's what she wants. So dang it. Okay. All right. Oh, let me just say, don't affirm your children with generalities. This is a real simple one. Be specific. I asked my son, how was school? Well, it sucked. I hate it. Well, what happened? Well, my teacher made fun of me. Huh. Well, tell me, what class was that? Oh, it was my 6th period class at Palmer. Well, what happened in your 1st period? In your 2nd? In your 3rd? In your 4th? So all of a sudden, it became clear that his day was pretty good. He just felt embarrassed because he was trying to be funny and it just kind of flopped, which is it's a family tradition. Poor guy. In the same way, if you're going to give your child a blessing, affirmation, be specific. Not just, hey, you did a good job. No, I like the way that you kept working on that math problem because you really put in good effort. And don't say, oh, you're such a smart kid. No. Say, you work really hard to learn that. All right? Okay. Couple things just to remember. Psychosocial needs. All of us are trying to do this. All of us try to get these needs met. So the more you're aware of them, with safety being the first one, because that's a part of the impact on the brain, if it's not. Safety and security, love and belonging, acceptance, power and choice, freedom and opportunities, fun and recreation, rejuvenation. You all need that. What are you doing for your self-care? And there's no time, I know. You have to be able to have something to give, right? That whole airplane, right? When the oxygen mask drops down, put it on yourself first. That's what we're doing here too. Has anybody ever joined the chaos of your children? If not every hand goes up, then you're lying, right? It's not a judgment again. It's a, oh gosh, I can't believe I did that. All right? Deregulated yourself. This is what your heart rate looks like. This is what your heart rate variability. Who's heard of heart math? Anybody heard of heart math? Got a couple folks. It's about the way in which your heart beats, and if it's consistent, this is the part that tells your brain you're fine, all is well. When you're frustrated, it does this. And that's what tells the brain, oh my gosh, get the cortisol and adrenaline going. We got to get out of this. Sucks. So that's why part of some really cool work is helping kids understand and learn to breathe in a way that makes it more consistent this way. That's just meditation, and I know it's a word that feels kind of, but how about breathing? In 1, 2, 3, hold 1, 2, 3, exhale 1, 2, 3. If you do that every morning with your children, because that's what St. A's in Milwaukee does to work with the most difficult teenagers that they have. Okay. I think I'm gonna pass through this, being truly heard and seen, that we're held in someone's mind and heart. How do you communicate that your children, even though they drive you crazy when they're fussing, that they are precious in your eyes? Okay, who ate glue when you were in elementary school? Okay, nice, nice. The glue for all of this. The glue is elephants. No. Do we know what happened in 1992 in South Africa? Do you know that today there are elephants that are no longer growing ivory? Because they have, through evolution, they survive when they don't have as much ivory because they're not being killed for the ivory. So evolution is taking place right in front of our eyes. In the early 1990s, elephants were killed for their ivory, leaving orphaned elephants. And the orphaned elephants were brought onto this this park in South Africa to take care of them. Well, then they became teenage boys. And the teenage orphaned elephants going through puberty had a hormone called must that began to be secreted. M-U-S-T-H. They got more aggressive and they started killing the white rhinos. The forest ranger, or the park rangers, brought 6 bull elephants into the park. And this is not a, I brought you into this world, I'll take you out kind of OG thing. Okay? That's not what it was, to say I'm going to whoop you into shape. It was their presence reduced the hormone, which then led to no longer killing the rhinos. So I stop with that because it's important to understand that it's no longer nature versus nurture. Right? That old saying that, well, you're just born this way, this is the way it's always going to be, it's that how we interact with one another has an impact on our bodies and our minds. And so whatever has happened or did happen or is yet to happen, no matter how difficult, it doesn't mean that's it. And so the more that we can move and work and take serious the science, the better off our children's coping, ability to learn is going to be. Because when the cortisol level's high, they're not retaining. They can't, because actually cortisol kills brain cells in the hippocampus, which is the memory part of the limbic system. It makes memorizing more difficult. So, with that in mind, I think I've talked your ear off. Deborah said what kind of resources are there. I think that I would love to have some more question and answer discussion time. The key, I think, as far as resources is, what can you do first in your home, in your situation? Because going to a therapist takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and it may or may not be real successful. So, I have a few brochures for my program. We work with kids at TwoCore, they're 15 to 19. And like I said, We do a lot of experiential activities to work on the brain, as well as then we do vocational training and job placement, because that's movement and that gives the power to the kids rather than, again, I don't want our kids sitting in offices too much.